The crackling of the wood still echoes in my dreams, as if the time of that moment were trapped inside me. It was 3 a.m. on March 14, 2019, and the fire consumed the benches where my grandmother had prayed for 15 years. My name is Sumon Chakma. I am 32 years old, and that night I learned that there are fires that destroy and fires that purify. The smell of kerosene came before the voices, piercing the darkness of our small village in the hills of Vanaban, in southeastern Bangladesh, where the mountains dissolve into mist and the forest seems endless. Our Chakma community carried centuries of Buddhist traditions, rituals celebrated under the full moon and passed down through generations. But my family had found a different faith, a light that transformed us from within, a hope we thought indestructible, until that night. Our church was simple, bamboo and palm leaves with a rusty zinc roof that sounded like drums when it rained. It could barely hold 40 people, but for us it was the most sacred place in the world. We raised each wall with our own hands, singing hymns as we drove the posts into the red earth of the hills. I remember the day we finished building. My father wept silently, praying that this place would be a beacon in the darkness. It was 3 years of meetings, 3 years of simple worship with a goatskin drum, a bamboo flute, and our voices rising to the sky. 3 years in which we saw lives transformed. Young people who were once lost in alcohol and drugs found purpose. Elderly people discovered that it's never too late to start over. But not everyone celebrated these changes. Tensions grew silently, like weeds after the rain. Traditional leaders saw each conversion as betrayal, each baptism as an attack on their ancestors. There were cold stares in the markets, families who stopped speaking to us, and crops sabotaged under the cover of night. That morning, I was jolted from my sleep by shouts. "The church is burning!" My father's voice cut through the darkness like thunder. I jumped from my straw mat, my heart racing, my hands trembling. I tried to find my sandals, but to no avail. I ran barefoot, feeling the damp earth and stones hurting my feet. From high above, about 200 meters above our house, I saw the fire rise against the black sky. Orange and yellow tongues licked the night, illuminating the faces of those who came to destroy us. The air was full of sparks like cursed fireflies, and the crackling of the fire mingled with their laughter. The almost full moon watched everything, silent, impassive, while I thought about how many times I had looked at it during our nightly worship, feeling the presence of God as real as the air I breathed. Where was that presence now? As I drew closer, the heat hit my face like a slap. I had to step back, shielding my eyes with my arm. 6 men with torches surrounded the church, their shadows cast on the hillsides, dancing grotesquely in the firelight. Their eyes held not only hatred, there was a dark conviction in them, something that made them believe they were not committing a crime. To them, they were protecting the purity of the village, expelling a contamination that threatened to destroy everything they knew. One of them, someone I had known since childhood, held in his hands the burnt remains of a Bible. The pages flew like wounded birds, turning to ashes before touching the ground. I immediately recognized that worn blue cover. It was the Bible we used to teach the children on Sunday mornings, each page marked with colorful drawings and stories that now dissolved into smoke. "Get out of here," said the leader Rangu with a spine-chilling firmness. He and my father had shared rice harvests for years, but there in that moment, no bonds seemed to matter. "This land is not for traitors who abandon their ancestors. You have brought shame upon our people." My younger sister, Purnima, only 16 years old, wept, clinging to our mother's arm. Her clean tears stung her soot-stained face, and her body trembled like a leaf swaying in a storm. My mother, a woman who had already faced unimaginable losses, 3 children in infancy, hunger and disease, now seemed more fragile than ever before. Her lips moved in silent prayers, but her eyes betrayed a fear I had never seen in her before. My father, at 60 years old, bent over from decades of work in the rice terraces, advanced slowly but determinedly, like a man who had decided that, whatever the cost, he would protect his family. But Rangu, merciless, charged at him. There was a shove, and my father fell to the damp earth. The sound of his body hitting the ground broke something inside me. I rushed to help him, feeling his rough, trembling hands grip mine. "Please," I pleaded, my voice hoarse with emotion and smoke. "This is our home. We were born here. Our parents and grandparents are buried in these hills." "No more," Rangu replied, with a coldness sharper than the night wind from the mountains. He spat at my father's feet, a gesture of utter contempt in our culture. "You have until dawn to leave. If you are still here when the sun rises, the fire that destroyed your temple will also destroy your homes. And not just your homes." We didn't need explanations. Fear hung in the air, thick as the smoke that surrounded us. The wind shifted, bringing a black column that enveloped us. We coughed, choked, covered our mouths with our clothes, and stumbled over each other. My eyes burned and tears mingled with the sweat and soot on my face. But the worst pain didn't come from the smoke. It was seeing what we loved disappear. The pews where we had prayed, the places where children learned about Jesus and the elderly found peace, were being consumed by flames. The wooden cross that my grandfather had carved, a symbol of our faith and legacy, now twisted in the fire. He had worked on that cross for weeks, carefully carving every detail while telling us stories of his own conversion. For a moment, I saw it shine intensely, beautiful even amidst the pain, before disintegrating in a shower of sparks. At that moment, something inside me broke too. There were no sirens, no rescue. In those remote hills, justice wasn't blind, it was cruel. It depended on who had the most strength, the most allies, the most willingness to use violence. And we, the few believers in the village, had none of that. We were just 18 families against a community of over 300. Sheep among wolves, exactly as Jesus had warned. We only had faith. But that morning, honestly, it seemed insufficient. As the fire continued to consume everything, other brothers and sisters began to arrive. Their faces reflected the same devastation and terror. Some fell to their knees. Others stood paralyzed, unable to process what they saw. An elderly woman named Bimala, 83 years old, the first convert from the village, limped towards us, leaning on her cane. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks as she murmured, "Lord, why?" Ashes fell upon us like rain, and a question pierced me like an arrow. "God, where are you? Don't you see what they are doing to us?" The silence of the sky was deafening. The stars continued to shine, indifferent. The fire devoured what we had built, and we, who proclaimed that God was our refuge and strength, were on the verge of losing everything. I was born in these mountains, where the mist rises every morning as if the sky itself were breathing upon the earth. My Chakma family has lived in Bandarban for generations, cultivating rice on terraces that resemble stairways to heaven. My grandfather always said that our ancestors carved these hills with their own hands and that each stone knew our names. I grew up surrounded by Buddhist rituals. I remember the Boisabi festival processions, when the village dressed in vibrant colors and brought offerings to the monks who came from the valley. My grandmother burned incense every morning in front of a small altar, murmuring prayers I didn't understand, but which sounded like ancient songs. The incense smoke mingled with the aroma of tea in her clay teapot, creating an atmosphere that marked my entire childhood. Life was hard, but simple. My father worked on the terraces from sunrise to sunset. I learned to distinguish weeds from rice before I even learned to read. Water flowed through bamboo channels we built following our grandparents' methods, and during the rainy season, the sound of the water was our constant music. But there was darkness too. Men lost themselves in alcohol, beat their wives, forgot their children. Fights over land ended in bloodshed. I saw my best friend die at age 12, a victim of a snake bite that the shaman insisted on treating with rituals instead of taking him to the hospital, a 3-hour trip. And it was in this scenario of pain and fragility that the gospel arrived, in the most unexpected, silent yet powerful way. In 2012, a missionary named Samuel crossed our mountains. He wasn't like the foreigners who sometimes passed through here. Samuel came from Dhaka and spoke our dialect with a funny accent that made the children laugh. But there was something different about him. A gleam of peace in his face, a peace I had never seen in any monk or village elder. He stayed among us, built a small bamboo house on the outskirts of town, and began helping wherever he could. He taught children to read and write, something many of us had never learned. He healed wounds with remedies brought from the valley. He didn't preach on street corners or challenge our traditions. He simply lived differently. And that difference began to spark questions. My father was the first to approach him. One afternoon, after Samuel had helped repair our irrigation canal without asking for anything in return, he invited him in for tea. The conversation stretched until midnight. I listened from my rug as they spoke of a God who didn't demand sacrifices or complicated rituals, but offered unconditional love. My father, who had carried the weight of the family for decades, wept that night. I had never seen him cry before. 3 months later, he was baptized in the river that runs at the foot of the mountains. I was 25 years old and watched with skepticism and curiosity. When Samuel submerged him, something happened. I don't know how to explain it. Upon emerging, my father had a different glow on his face, as if years of fatigue and pain had been washed away by the current. 6 months later, my mother followed in his footsteps, and then my sister. The transformation in our family was visible. The arguments ceased. My father gave up the rice liquor he had been drinking for years, and Samuel's peace finally entered our home. The neighbors noticed, but didn't fully understand. Some were curious, others suspicious. I resisted for almost a year. I kept seeing and feeling the change, but my pride was a mountain higher than any impulse of faith. How could I abandon everything I'd been taught? What would my friends say? The answer came on a stormy night. Lightning struck so close to our house that the thunder shook the bamboo walls. Fear paralyzed me, and in that moment of vulnerability, for the first time, I prayed. Not to the spirits of the mountains, nor to Buddha, but to the God my family spoke of. "If you are real," I whispered in the darkness as the rain beat against the roof, "show me." There was no light, no audible voice, but when dawn broke, something had changed within me. It was as if a door closed for years had finally opened. 3 days later, I knelt before Samuel and asked to learn more. A month later, I too was baptized in that river. In 2016, there were 18 families gathered in Samuel's house, which barely fit 5 people. We sang with simple instruments, shared testimonies that brought tears of joy to our eyes, and studied the Bible translated into our language with complete dedication. Then Samuel put forward a bold idea, to build a church. He explained that it wasn't to separate us from the community, but to offer a place where others could find what we had discovered. The idea terrified and thrilled me at the same time. We worked for 4 months, day after day, singing, praying, and building each wall with our own hands. Each pole erected was a declaration of faith. Each nail hammered, a silent prayer. Samuel taught us construction songs, and our voices echoed through the hills as we worked. The neighbors watched us, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. On the day we placed the cross my grandfather had carved on the roof, some village elders came to watch. They said nothing, but their gazes spoke volumes. Rangu was among them, arms crossed, his face bearing a grimace that seemed hardened by time. My father tried to greet him, but Rangu turned and walked away without a word. The first meetings at the church were powerful. Entire families found healing. Shopon, a young man who had attempted suicide twice, found a reason to live. Chompa, a woman beaten by her husband for years, saw her marriage restored when they both learned about the gospel. But shadows also grew. Rumors began to spread. They said we were being paid by foreigners, that we planned to destroy Buddhist temples. Lies repeated over and over began to sound true. The threats became more visible. During an evening service, someone threw stones at the bamboo walls. The next morning, we found animal droppings at the entrance. Merchants refused to sell us rice or kerosene. The tension reached its peak when Rangu called a meeting of all the elders. They wanted us to close the church and return to our roots. My father attended the meeting and came back pale. They're going to do something, he warned us. We prayed like never before. We fasted, we pleaded, and for 3 months nothing happened. We began to believe that maybe they would leave us alone. We were wrong. The days leading up to the attack were strangely silent, too silent, like when the jungle falls silent before the tiger arrives. A silence that sends shivers down your spine without you knowing why. The stairs in the market became heavy, laden with something I couldn't fully decipher. On Tuesday, March 12th, 2 days before the fire, a boy from the village came running to our house. He was only 8 years old, his eyes filled with tears. "Uncle Sumon," he whispered, looking back as if he feared someone would follow him. I heard my father and other men saying, "The church is a problem. It must disappear." The boy's hand on my shoulder squeezed my soul. That night, we gathered in an emergency. The lamps barely illuminated our worried faces. Samuel read Psalm 91. "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." His voice was firm, but I noticed his hands trembled slightly as he held the Bible. "My brothers," my father said, rising with difficulty. "We've been through tough times before, but this time I feel the storm will be even bigger." Some nodded silently. Others began to cry. We arrived at the church. The bamboo door was still intact, but the shadows cast by the moon made the structure seem fragile, as if it could collapse at any moment. Samuel was kneeling before the altar, his hands clasped, his eyes closed. He didn't move when he saw us arrive. He only nodded silently, as if to say, "We are ready." The footsteps drew closer, the whispers too. Now we could clearly hear the metallic clang, axes and torches. Fear throbbed in my chest, but something inside me refused to give in. Looking at Bimala still sitting on her cane in the corner of the church, I felt a surge of courage. At 83, she remained steadfast, and if she could face death, so could we. Suddenly, the first torch touched the bamboo wall. The crackling of the burning wood seemed to echo in our souls. Samuel stood firm and began to sing a hymn. His notes rose through the night air, and almost miraculously, our voices joined his. We sang loudly, not in defiance, but in prayer. Each word seemed to create an invisible barrier, a shield made of pure faith. But the attackers did not hesitate. Branches were broken, screams echoed, and soon the fire began to spread. The smell of smoke reached our noses and made us cough violently. Ponima wept, clinging to my mother, and my father held my hand tightly, conveying silent courage. Samuel continued singing, even as the flames licked the entrance to the church. He seemed immune to panic, completely immersed in prayer. I realized that something within me was also transforming. It wasn't human courage, but faith. Every cry from outside, every crackle of burning wood mingled with the sound of our voices in prayer. And then, when I thought everything would be consumed, a strong wind descended from the hills, pushing the smoke upwards, giving us a moment of clarity. The silhouettes of the attackers became blurred, momentarily losing focus. We seized this brief moment to protect Bimala, Purnima, and my mother, taking them to a safer corner of the church. What began as a simple prayer became a fight for survival. It was no longer just our faith being tested, but our lives, our families, our right to exist. The night was just beginning, and the fire burned as much inside the church as it did within us. The smell of kerosene arrived before the fire. It was a strange smell in the mountains, sharp and menacing. And then we saw it. The first flames licked the bamboo walls of the church. Men were there, watching with satisfaction the work of destruction. One carried a torch, the light flickering on his face, distorting his expression into something cruel. Another kicked the door open, forcing the fire inside. "Samuel!" I yelled without thinking, my voice piercing the night like a desperate cry. For a moment, the world froze. They with their torches, us in the middle of the hill, separated by a wall of flames that seemed alive. "Too late," said Rangoon, emerging from the shadows, cold and calculating. "Where is Samuel?" I asked, my voice faltering. My heart clenched at the thought of our leader trapped in the flames. One of the men laughed cruelly. "He left an hour ago. Your preacher had more sense than you." An immediate relief washed over me, followed by the pain of seeing our temple consumed before our eyes. The fire roared like a beast. The bamboo crackled and exploded, sending sparks skyward. The zinc roof warped from the intense heat. Members of the congregation began to arrive, drawn by the blaze and the screams. Men fell to their knees. Women clung to one another. Children cowered behind terrified parents, their eyes reflecting the fire like tiny mirrors of hell. We had to retreat step by step as the heat pushed us back. The Bibles we had guarded so carefully twisted and burned. The pews we had built with our own hands turned to embers. The children's drawings on the walls vanished in smoke. "You have until dawn," Rangoon shouted, his voice piercing the chaos. "If you're still here when the sun rises, your homes will be next." The threat was clear. Our faith had cost us everything. Our home, our community, our safety. Everything was crumbling before us and we were powerless. As I watched the flames devour 3 years of work, testimonies, and God's presence in that place, a question burned in my heart. Was it worth it? Was it worth giving everything for a faith that now seemed as fragile as bamboo consumed by fire? Dawn arrived like a mockery. The sun illuminated the smoldering ruins, revealing utter devastation. Only blackened posts remained standing like accusing fingers, and mounds of ash scattered by the morning wind. There was no time for mourning, and then they returned. Rangu and his men arrived with the sun, now more numerous, perhaps 20, some with machetes at their waists. The message was clear and terrifying. It was time to leave. We only had what we could carry on our backs. My mother wrapped rice in burlap sacks, some clothes, and an old pot. My sister Purnima held a small Bible that Samuel had given her against her chest. The pages were crumpled from tears. My father carried the basics: a machete, ropes, and a tarp. I held my youngest son, only 3 years old, who didn't understand why everyone around us was crying. 18 families gathered on the dusty road leading out of the village. There were almost 60 of us, including children. Elderly people who needed canes, mothers carrying babies, and young people helping as best they could. We looked like refugees from a war, and in a way we were. Samuel was with us. His face showed a mixture of pain and determination. "Where are we going?" someone asked, casting one last glance at the houses we've known forever. "Arangamati," Samuel replied firmly. "I have contacts there, they will help us." Arangamati was 3 days' journey away through the jungle. It was a more dangerous route than the road, but it would give us anonymity and less chance of encountering hostility from other villages. The first day was exhausting. The trail disappeared into dense vegetation, and we had to clear a path with machetes. Thorns tore through clothing and scratched our skin. Clouds of insects buzzed around our heads, and the humid air felt like it was swallowing our lungs. The children cried from exhaustion, and Bimala, at 83 years old, moved slowly but refused to fall behind. "I've walked these mountains all my life," she said, panting. "I'm not going to stop now." 2 young men helped her, carrying her through the most difficult sections. At midday, we arrived at a stream. The water ran cold and crystal clear over the stones. We drank greedily, filling our bottles and splashing water on our faces, as if to wash away the exhaustion of the journey. My mother prepared a simple meal with the rice we had brought, cooking it over a small fire. The smoke rose through the trees, mingling with our silent prayers. "Why is this happening to us?" Purnima asked, her voice choked with emotion. Her 16 years hadn't prepared her for losing everything. "Where is God?" Samuel sat beside her on a moss-covered rock. "God didn't promise the path would be easy," he said softly. "He promised he would walk with us. There's a difference." But I asked myself the same question. I looked at those families who had lost everything for following Christ. The children were hungry. The elderly were suffering. What kind of God would allow that? The afternoon brought rain. Not the light rain of the dry season, but a torrential storm that turned the trail into a river of mud. We took shelter under trees, covering ourselves with the tarp we had brought, huddled together for warmth. The sound of the rain hitting the leaves was deafening. The world shrank to that small circle of trembling bodies waiting for the storm to pass. When it finally subsided, it was too late to continue. We camped right there in the heart of the jungle. The men improvised shelters with branches and leaves, and the women cared for the children, singing soft songs to lull them to sleep. But sleep seemed an impossible luxury to attain. The jungle seemed alive at night. Every sound made us shudder. The distant roar of some animal, the cracking of branches, the howling of the wind through the trees. The second day of hiking was even more difficult. The terrain became increasingly steep and treacherous. We climbed slippery slopes, clinging to roots and rocks as if each step were a matter of life or death. One of the children twisted her ankle, and we had to carry her the rest of the way. Our rice was running out, and the water we had in our bottles tasted of dirt and leaves. In the middle of the afternoon, something made us freeze. A low, menacing growl very close. A leopard. Men positioned themselves in a circle around women and children, raising machetes with trembling hands. My heart was pounding so hard I could almost hear each beat. Samuel began to pray, his voice firm even with the fear that consumed us. Lord, surround your people as you promised. Let your angels encamp around us. The growl sounded again, this time distant, and then came absolute silence. We waited, prepared for the worst, until we finally resumed our march. No one spoke for hours. That night we slept in shifts. I stood guard at midnight, sitting with my machete in my lap, watching the dancing shadows the moon cast between the trees. Every movement seemed to conceal a predator. It was in that silence, in that solitude laden with fear, that I heard the voice of God. It wasn't audible, but a whisper in my spirit as real as the wind on my face. I didn't bring you here to abandon you. Tears streamed down my face. Tears of relief, of liberation, of something I couldn't name. For the first time since we started running, I felt peace. Not a peace that erased the danger or the suffering, but a peace that existed despite them. The certainty that we were not alone in that dark forest. The third day dawned shrouded in a thick fog. We could barely see a few meters ahead, but Samuel encouraged us to keep going. We're almost there, very close. His optimism seemed impossible considering our hunger, exhaustion, and wounds. But we continued, one step at a time. At midday, the fog began to dissipate. And then we saw the Rangamati Valley open up before us like a living promise. The tin roofs gleamed in the sun, and the river meandered like a silver ribbon across the plain. For the first time in 3 days, someone smiled. My mother fell to her knees, gazing at the scene. We did it, my God. We did it. But even in that moment of relief, none of us could have imagined that we were walking straight toward a miracle. We arrived in Rangamati as shadows of ourselves. Our clothes were torn, soiled with mud and sweat. Our faces showed hunger, exhaustion, and every emotion we had carried on the trail. Yet there was hope in the air. A hope that could only come from God. The inhabitants of the settlement watched us with a mixture of curiosity and compassion as we made our way along the dirt roads. Some children followed us at a distance, whispering amongst themselves, perhaps trying to understand why we arrived like weary shadows, carrying our lives on our backs. Samuel led us to the outskirts, to a barren plot of land where the jungle began to reclaim its space. There were no houses, no walls, no roofs, only earth, tall grass, and a gigantic tree, standing like a silent sentinel over that forgotten space. It was an old mango tree, with a trunk so thick that 3 men together couldn't encircle it. Its branches spread out like protective arms, offering generous shade. Here? My father asked, trying to hide the disappointment in his voice. Samuel nodded firmly. For now, God will provide. We set up camp under that tree. The tops became makeshift roofs. Stones marked the boundaries of our small spaces, and the earthen floor became our bed, with belongings as pillows. The rain soaked us, mosquitoes attacked us, and life was reduced to a routine of pure survival. The first few days were hard. We men looked for work in the village, but few wanted to hire refugees without references. We did anything, carrying sacks at the market, cleaning stables, looking for odd jobs that would allow us to buy rice. The women washed clothes in the river for a few coins, and the children collected firewood to sell. And then came the illness. Old Bimala fell gravely ill. Fever consumed her, and delirium made her speak to people who were no longer there. There was no money for a doctor, only my mother's constant care, wetting her forehead with cold cloths, insisting that she drink water. We prayed incessantly, but the truth was that we feared the worst. One night my father murmured, "If she leaves us, she will be the first we have lost since all this began." I don't know if our faith will hold up, but something extraordinary happened. One morning Bimala woke up. The fever had disappeared. She was more alive than she had been in weeks, her eyes shining in a way that made us believe again. "I had a dream," she said. "A man dressed in white touched my forehead and said, 'It's not your time yet. You need to see what I'm going to do here.' That miracle gave us back our strength. Even without a building, we decided to gather for worship. We couldn't let our circumstances destroy our faith. On Saturday night, as the day's heat began to subside, we sat in a circle under the mango tree. The oil lamps flickered in the wind, illuminating tired faces marked by the sun and suffering. Samuel opened his Bible, its pages yellowed with use and dampness. "Brothers," he began, "we lost our building, but we didn't lose the church. The church isn't walls, it's us." We sang without instruments, just our voices rising towards the stars that were beginning to appear in the sky. The singing was vulnerable, but true. Tears flowed freely, mixing pain and hope on every face. And then it happened. Around 9 p.m., we saw something no one could explain. A light floated above the hose, suspended in the air like a star that had descended from the sky. The glow was serene, intense, and filled us with a silent certainty. God was with us there, in the midst of our pain and weakness. It wasn't the light of a lantern nor the glow of a bonfire. It was different, purer, more intense. It shone with a white golden luminosity that didn't hurt the eyes, even when we looked directly at it. The singing stopped suddenly. We all stood up at the same time, our eyes fixed on that impossible phenomenon. The light remained suspended above the highest branches of the mango tree, pulsing gently, as if breathing. It emitted no sound, cast no shadows. It simply existed, beautiful and mysterious. "What is this?" Purnima whispered, clinging to my arm. No one answered. We remained in absolute silence for long minutes, perhaps 10, but time seemed to have stopped. The light did not move, did not change. It simply shone with a constant intensity that filled our hearts with something we could not name. Then, so gradually that we scarcely noticed, she began to fade. She didn't disappear suddenly. She became ethereal, faint, until finally she vanished completely, leaving us in the relative darkness of the oil lamps. A reverent silence followed. Then old Bimala fell to her knees. "It's him," she said, her voice breaking. "It's him telling us that he's here, that he hasn't forgotten us." That night, no one could sleep. We stayed awake until dawn, whispering about what we had seen, trying to decipher its meaning. Some believed they had seen an angel, others the very presence of God. The consensus was unanimous. We had witnessed something supernatural. The news spread quickly. The next day, residents of the settlement began to appear, drawn by the story of the celestial light. Some were skeptical, others eager for hope. We told them our story: the fire, the exodus, the struggle for survival. And finally, the light. "Prove it to us," challenged a man from the village, arms crossed and a wry smile. "We cannot conjure God," Samuel replied patiently. "He reveals himself when and how he wants, but you are welcome to stay and pray with us. If this touches your heart, do not remain silent. Share this testimony with someone who needs to remember that God never abandons his people." The following night, we gathered again under the mango tree. This time, there were over 100 of us, including villagers. Some came to mock, others with genuine expectation. We sang, prayed, and shared testimonies. The air was filled with tension, hope, and faith. Then it happened again. The light appeared in exactly the same place, above the highest branches. It was even more intense, more glorious. It illuminated the entire camp as if it were midday. Some skeptics gasped. Others fell to their knees instantly. One woman began to cry uncontrollably. The light remained for about 20 minutes. During all that time, I felt such a profound peace that all worries, all pain, all fear simply dissolved. In silence, every heart present understood. God was with us. Then the light appeared, exactly in the same spot above the mango tree, but this time it seemed bigger, more radiant, enveloping the entire clearing. The policeman froze. His skepticism was swallowed by the brilliance that filled every corner of the night. The light not only illuminated bodies, but seemed to penetrate souls, revealing hearts, fears, pains, and hopes. The man, once hard and inflexible, fell to his knees. His arms, crossed in tense moments before, now trembled. Tears streamed down his face without him realizing it. I don't understand, but I feel something," he murmured, almost voicelessly. Samuel approached him and placed a hand on his shoulder, saying simply, "God doesn't ask for immediate understanding. He asks for an open heart." That same night, more miracles occurred. A boy with cerebral palsy began to move his fingers, then his arms, and finally stood up with support, smiling as if he had never felt pain. A woman with extreme chronic anemia felt a sudden surge of energy, as if every cell in her body had been restored. The cries of joy, the shouts of disbelief, the praises echoing beneath the tree created a symphony of faith that seemed in tune with heaven itself. And it wasn't just physical. Old grudges disappeared, broken friendships were mended, families reconciled, hardened hearts softened. The light not only healed bodies, it revealed hearts, awakened souls, rekindled hopes forgotten for decades. The policeman, now kneeling, began to pray with them. The crowd, which had previously feared authority, began to sing with even more fervor. The clearing was filled with life, light, and sound, and no one, Not even the most skeptical could deny that something divine was happening. Each night, more people arrived. What had begun as 18 refugee families had now become a movement of faith and healing, transforming the lives of all who approached the mango tree. The light became a symbol, hope, and living promise. God was present, active, and never abandoned those who sought Him with all their heart. I watched His expression change before our eyes. First mockery, then confusion, and finally a profound, almost reverent astonishment. He slowly removed his cap as if before something sacred. When the light finally faded, he approached Samuel with tears in his eyes. "Forgive me," he whispered. "I came to stop this, but now I can stay." His name was Raim. That night, he gave his life to Christ, and he didn't stop there. The following week, he brought his whole family. His conversion marked a turning point for all of us. If even a police officer who arrived with suspicion could sense something genuine there, it meant that God was legitimizing our work and protecting our little flock. Amen. If you believe, God can transform even the hardest heart. But the most surprising change happened with Jalal. Known in the region as a dangerous man, the leader of a violent group, no one dared mention him without fear. There were rumors of horrific crimes, robbery, extortion, even murder. He was the last man anyone would expect to see seeking God. He arrived on the 6th night, hidden among the crowd, hood over his head. Later, he confessed that he came with the intention of exposing our meeting, perhaps even sabotaging it. He carried a knife hidden in his belt. When the light appeared, something happened inside him. Jalal fell to the ground, trembling like a frightened child. Between sobs, he repeated, "God, I'm so sorry. God, forgive me." Samuel knelt beside him. "Brother, what happened?" he asked. "I did terrible things," he replied, "hurting so many people, destroying families. I don't deserve to be here." Samuel touched his shoulder and said in a calm voice, "That's exactly why grace exists." That night, Jalal opened his heart. He recounted every mistake, every crime, every dark moment, hiding nothing. Some in the crowd recognized him, faces filled with anger. A woman shouted, "You killed my brother." The silence that followed was tense, almost unbearable. Jalal did not defend himself. He simply lowered his head, ready to accept any punishment. Then Samuel did something I will never forget. He placed himself between Jalal and the crowd. "If God can forgive you," he said, "who are we not to do the same? If He can transform a man like Jalal, there is hope for all of us." The woman, hesitant, stepped forward. For a moment, I feared the worst, but instead of anger, she extended her hand. "If God has forgiven you, then I forgive you too. But you need to change. You need to repair what you have destroyed." "I will," Jalal promised. "With God's help, I will dedicate my life to repairing what I have broken." And he did. Over time, Jalal became one of the most committed members of the community. He used his past influence to protect, mediate conflicts, and sow peace where violence once reigned. His transformation became a living story in the region, a testament to God's power to change any heart. 2 months later, under that same tree, more than 400 people were gathering regularly. We created an organized routine, shifts for cooking communal meals, reading and writing classes, and prayer groups that met throughout the day. The community was no longer just a shelter, but a home of faith, hope, and renewal. What began as a refugee camp was transforming into something much bigger, a vibrant community full of hope and faith. The old mango tree that had sheltered us in the early days had become a symbol of resilience. We painted a large white cross on its trunk and hung lanterns from its branches, which illuminated the entire night. Soon, people began calling it the Tree of Light and came from afar to gather under its shade and pray. News of the miracles and transformation reached those who had driven us out of Bandarban. Some sent messengers to verify if it was all true. Among them was Ratan, son of Rangu, the man who had led the attack on our church. He came intending to spy on us, but spent 3 days observing healings, conversions, the mutual care of the community. On the last night, when the light shone brighter than ever, Ratan approached my father and whispered, "Tell your God that I was wrong." Ratan returned to Bandarban carrying stories that would change everything. The seed they tried to destroy by burning our bamboo church was flourishing, multiplying, spreading hope beyond what we could imagine. What the enemy planned for our defeat, God was using to create a revival. He transforms our greatest losses into powerful testimonies. If this story is touching your heart, know that the same God who worked in our lives can work in yours. 6 years have passed since that morning when flames consumed our bamboo temple. 6 years since we crossed the jungle not knowing if we would survive. 6 years since the first night the light shone on the mango tree. Today, sitting under that same tree, now surrounded by permanent buildings, a brick church that welcomes more than 1,000 people every Sunday, I understand something I couldn't see at the time. God is never late. He operates on a different calendar than ours. On the night we prayed, watching our temple burn, He was already preparing something much greater. We were asking for protection for a bamboo structure. He had plans for a movement that would change an entire region. We were praying for safety in our village. He was guiding us toward a purpose that would touch thousands of lives. The light in the tree appeared every night for 3 months as a reminder that God would never abandon us. Then it disappeared as mysteriously as it had appeared. Some feared they had done something wrong, but Samuel wisely explained, the light fulfilled its purpose. It showed that God was with us in our most difficult moment. And from then on, we learned to walk by faith, not just by sight. The community continued to grow and the stories of transformation multiplied. Jalal, the former violent criminal, founded a rehabilitation center for at-risk youth. Kamal, the man whose leg had been healed, became an itinerant evangelist, taking his testimony from village to village. Every step we took was guided by faith, and each life transformed was proof that God was working something greater than any of us could imagine. Elderly Bimala lived for 3 more years, long enough to witness more than 200 people being baptized under the tree before passing away peacefully, surrounded by the family her faith helped her build. Shapla, a woman who had once lived a dissolute life, became a prayer leader. Her intercession brought healing and deliverance to many, and her testimony was powerful because she did not hide her past. It was in my worst moment, she said, that God found me. If He can transform me, He can transform anyone. Even Rangu, the man who had led the attack on our church, finally appeared. A year after the fire, he arrived in Rangamati, broken and in poor health. The doctors gave him no hope. His son Ratan, who had been telling him stories of miracles and the peace he had found in the community, had been pressuring him for months to come. Rangu couldn't look my father in the eye. Shame weighed on him like a physical burden. And yet my father embraced him. Brother, he said, we all need grace. Rangu broke down in tears in his arms. That afternoon, he gave his life to Christ. 2 weeks later, God restored his health. He returned to Bandarban transformed, and his testimony opened doors that had previously been closed. The same families who persecuted us began to question their own prejudices. Today, there are 3 churches in Bandarban. The persecution hasn't completely disappeared, but it's not what it used to be. Some Chakma families who previously saw us as traitors came to see us as a source of hope. Some returned to their old village and helped rebuild it. Others remained in Rangamati, where it all began. I learned, with every tear shed, every night of fear and every moment of doubt, that God wastes nothing. The fire that destroyed our church purified our faith. The exile that separated us from our home led us to a place of greater influence. The light that shone upon the tree not only comforted us but announced to the world that God was doing something new. Perhaps you are in your own dark jungle right now. Perhaps you have lost something you loved, something that seemed essential. Perhaps your flames have consumed dreams, plans, or security. Let me share what I learned on that 3-day walk. God is not abandoning you. He is repositioning you. Your jungle may not be literal. It may be an illness, a betrayal, a loss that seems unbearable. But listen, the same God who lit a light in the middle of nowhere, who transformed desperate refugees into a thriving community, and who even changed the hearts of our persecutors, is with you. I'm not saying it will be easy. It wasn't easy for us. There were nights when doubt seemed stronger than faith, moments when surrendering seemed more sensible than persevering. But every time we were about to crumble, God appeared, sometimes spectacularly, like the light on the tree, most often in subtle ways, a hug, a word, a prayer answered silently. God was always there, and He will be for you too. A word of encouragement at the right time. An unexpected provision when we had nothing. Supernatural strength when we thought we couldn't take another step. The resilience God gave us wasn't just for survival. It transformed our family, our community, our region, and continues to transform it. Every person who finds hope under that tree, every life touched by these testimonies, every heart that discovers God is real is evidence that resilience has a purpose. Share this testimony with someone who is facing their own storm. Tell that person that they are not alone and that God is not finished with their story yet. Samuel continues to lead the church, now with a team of elders that includes Jalal, Rahim, the former police officer, and my father. I serve as a teacher, teaching new converts truths that I almost lost sight of in my own dark night. My sister Purnima leads the children's ministry, with over 100 children learning each week that God is real and that His promises never fail. The mango tree is still there, now protected by a decorative fence. People come from all over to pray in its shade, seeking the same God who manifested Himself so powerfully there. Today we no longer need visible light because we have learned to walk in the invisible light of God's constant presence. If I could go back to that morning of March 14th, 2019, when the fire consumed everything we knew, I would tell my terrified and devastated self, hold on. I know you can't see it now, but God is writing a much bigger and more beautiful story than you can imagine. The ashes of this night will become the fertilizer for a garden that will feed thousands. The darkness you feel is just the prelude to a glorious dawn. I want to end with a prayer for you wherever you are, whatever you're going through. Heavenly Father, for the person listening to this now, who feels the flames have consumed their hope, who walks through a dead-end jungle, I declare your presence over their life. May they know with the same certainty with which we saw that light that you have never abandoned them. May their resistance become a testimony. May their pain be transformed into purpose, and may the dark night of their life give way to a glorious dawn. In Jesus' name, amen. If you received this prayer, write your city in the comments so the community can pray with you. You are not alone. We are thousands who have walked similar paths and witnessed God's faithfulness. The light in the tree was real, the miracles were real, the transformation was real, and the God who did all this remains the same today. Your story is not over yet.